Well, hello and welcome back. Today I am here with my dear friend Colleen, who I am so excited to have here and just talk about drinking and alcohol and what it's done for our life, good, bad, ugly, whatever. So thank you, Colleen. You're actually my first interviewed guest. So thank you for
Ooh,
being my guinea pig and being here.
how exciting. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat about my experience. And I was joking with my husband prior to this that now I can say I've been on a podcast.
There you go. And hopefully it'll be one that people love, right?
Yes, I'm sure of it.
Yeah, thanks. So if you want to just say a little bit about yourself, if you want to say it all like kind of how we know each other or how we're connected on this, obviously whatever you'd like to share.
Yeah, for sure. Should I look at you? Should I look at myself? I'll look at myself when I'm talking about myself. So my name is Colleen Campbell. I've known Erica. I think we've known each other for over a decade, maybe even a decade and a half. We met many moons ago when we both worked at the Denver Post. And that's how we first sort of got connected and became friends. And then we've just always stayed in touch over the years. I've had the pleasure of working with your amazing husband too for a period of time. So that's how I feel like I've known you. And I think we also clicked just because we're both very interested in finding and building community and being supportive. And you've just helped me over the years in so many ways, whether it was going over my resume with me or practicing interview questions. And then to me, sort of being one of your guinea pigs when you did the initial Master of Moderation program back in 2021. I think it was called ShameOver then, right? So that was a transformative experience and really cool. So I just feel very grateful to have known you and continue to be your good friend all these years.
Yay. Well, I feel the same about you. You've always been so easy and wonderful to work with. And yeah, so it's been a delight. So to kind of, I guess, start off on a easy, lighthearted note, is there anything you're watching right now that you're just like really excited about?
Yeah, so we only stream. We don't have cable or anything, but we have a couple shows we're watching now. First one is Abbott Elementary, which is so charming and cute. Love that show. For anybody who hasn't watched it, totally recommend it. Kind of the vibe like The Office, Parks and Recs, whatever, but it's a school in Philly and it's just so funny. Danny and I were saying last night that they must have so much fun in the writer's room. And then the actors too, just like love that show. Then also watched the most recent season of Hacks. So both of these we've streamed
Oh,
on HBO Max. So
okay.
Hacks is it's essentially about two women, is how I describe it. One who's a really famous comedian, and then a younger woman who kind of they share the same agent and they're an unlikely pair to get synced up together. But over the seasons, they develop this relationship, Deborah and Ava. And it's really cool because it's all about I think it's mostly about relationships, is what I take from it. But it's just really cool to see a bunch of really strong, badass, messy female characters and complex characters too. And
Right.
it's really interesting. I love that show. I mean, I'd highly recommend it too. That's maybe one that's flying a little more under the radar.
Yeah, because
And then,
Abbott, I know, has gotten tons of Emmys.
yeah,
Hacks, is that the one Samantha from Sex and the City?
no. So the two main actresses in it are Jean Smart, who plays Deborah Vance, the comic, and then Hannah Einbinder plays
Okay.
Eva. Highly recommend it. Super cool. And then, of course, I love Bridgerton. And so the part two of season three came out, I think, yesterday or something. So
Oh, it
we'll be
did?
watching that this weekend.
Oh, okay. We'll have to get started on that. That's
Yeah.
definitely one that
Love,
we
love me
we
some
bench on.
spicy Bridgerton.
Oh God, yeah. So good. Oh, yeah, there's some inside jokes in that show.
Oh,
Uh
I'm sure. Lots of them.
yes. So, yeah, what is it? Not I pine for you, is that it? I burn for you.
Oh,
That
yeah, I
one.
burned. Yeah. I was
Yeah,
like, oh,
yeah.
that's like reaching back to season one, I think. Gonna have to revisit that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's good. So, on to our evolution of drinking. Where would you say you are right now when it comes to your relationship with alcohol?
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely been a journey, but I feel like I'm in a very healthy space with it right now. I feel like your program in particular, the group of us gals who did the initial, what do you call it, beta round? Is that what it's
Yeah.
called? I think when I started that, I was thinking about that. When you reached out about doing that, I was 100% on board, but I would say I was also like pretty nervous because I think back then in 2021, I was like nervous to do it in one sense because I feel like a lot of people taking a good hard look at your relationship with alcohol and with drinking can be a little scary because you just there's so much like shame and judgment wrapped up in it. And I think I was still operating from that sort of mindset back then. And I think you and I, even when I was initially on those calls, I was like, so my body language expressed exactly how I felt, even if I wasn't able to articulate it. I think I was really nervous and anxious and almost like closed off and worried. And then when you and I had a follow-up call, I think it might have even been just 6 months later, I felt so much more natural and like myself. And you even commented on it. You could just tell I was so much more at ease with that. And so I think what happened, how my relationship evolved over the past 3 years is that the best piece of advice that you gave in that program for me that I took personally was figure out your why. Like, why do you want to have a drink? Why are you drinking? And I think my why radically changed once I thought about it. And so, really leaning into the why being for pleasure and enjoyment, and only for that reason, not to take the edge off, not when I'm stressed, not when I feel uncomfortable in a social situation. It's really just strictly for pleasure and enjoyment. And I think that has allowed my relationship with alcohol to just like I said, like radically change and transform and have it be in such a healthier place than it used to be. And I should add on to that, drink in pleasure and enjoyment for moderation. So trying to avoid binge drinking as much as possible and just being really mindful about, consuming just 1 to 2, or if you're at a special occasion, I know parties come up or weddings or things like that, but really just instead of being in that mindset of, oh, I'm uncomfortable, I should have another, oh, it's free, I should have another, just being like, do I really want this right now? Do I need this right now? And so I think honestly, taking away all of that sort of like repressed guilt and shame that I'm sure a lot of people have around it has really made my relationship with it so much healthier and made me be able to be so much more intentional about things.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought, I mean, there's so many good nuggets there, but for me, one of the biggest changes in my journey as well is not drinking for negative emotions. So you had brought up to take the edge off or for stress, or that was a big part of why I was drinking without even necessarily realizing it, but we're just, so used to like at the end of the day, like it's your reward. It's you've had a stressful day,
Yeah.
take the edge off. And it you realize once you're in this process how much you are drinking for negative reasons as opposed to that pleasure like you were talking about.
Yeah, and I would say too that for pre-COVID times, I think a lot of women and maybe men and non-binary people could relate to this. When you hold yourself to a really high standard and you are trying to quote unquote be perfect all of the time or do all of the things and never disappoint anyone, or if you just have really high standards for yourself and how you look, you don't really give yourself a lot of like kindness. And so I think in the past I was just like used to, ever since I was younger, just, and I think women, we suffer from this more. It's like you're expected to be perfect. So it's just like that perfectionism, having those high standards for yourself, like having to feel like you need to look a certain way, act a certain way. It's all of these things that sort of like wrap up to create this perfect storm that can lead to a lot of stress and anxiety. And then you are like, for me, sometimes the only time I was like allowing myself to like almost like let that guard down or relax was when I was like having a drink or a couple drinks. And then when you do that, that's just a terrible relationship to have with alcohol. I'll just come out and say it, because then you end up overdoing it. You end up binge drinking, because it's the only time you're like, quote unquote, letting yourself relax.
Yeah.
And then, you wake up the next day with a hangover. And I used to have terrible anxiety. I think you were one of the people that like really popularized that phrase, where, you know, the physical symptoms wouldn't even be that bad, but just the anxiety was just so terrible and debilitating that I was just like, I don't want to keep living like this, you know, or I don't know if other people have experienced that, but it's almost like you berate yourself for like doing it again and not having the willpower. And now I know that like willpower is largely a myth, and really what it comes down to is discipline and motivation. But I feel like just it's horrible. Like for anybody who's like still sort of in that cycle, I totally feel for you, and you can definitely change it. Like that, I think is the awesome thing. And just realizing, yeah, what your why is. I keep going back to that, but I truly think that that poses a very specific and intentional question to yourself. And when you answer that, and I mean, it can change or it can change in different situations, but just really knowing that and establishing that, I think will help you really sort of understand what your current relationship is like and what you want it to be.
Yes. Well, and not only why you're drinking in the moment, but why it matters to be able to learn how to moderate, especially long term.
Yeah,
Because
for
we, of
sure.
course, have those little moments where it's just like, I know why I'm drinking and I don't care. I still want to drink, right? But
Yes,
it's hopefully getting that fewer and farther in between as we go.
for sure. Yeah. And I feel like you've shared tips with things that you've done. You have your cool jar, your vase where you put your, you know, chip in every day, and just watching that grow. And oh, lovely. See, you even have it right there. And, you know, I was thinking about that because in the past I was like maybe a little resistant to that idea for whatever reason. I tend to be the type of personality type where if I feel like restricted in a certain way, that's something that normally doesn't work well for me. But then I think I almost used to think I'd feel guilty, like looking at that would cause guilt instead of pride. But I think now I've grown and that could actually be helpful and cool. And you have to be kind to yourself again, like not just be judgmental in case you're like, you know, I want to have a glass of wine after work. But I was thinking it might be cool to try that idea because I do think that holidays and summertime are really when we're very social and we have a lot going on. And just by default, there's always that option to have a cocktail or go out or all of that. So I think it'd be interesting to try it for the summer and see how it goes.
Definitely. And you can make it work for you. So for me, it was the days that I chose not to drink, I would put something in. But it can even be whenever you stay at your goal or below, so it needs to be
Yeah,
something
that's a
that
great
you
idea, actually.
do, yeah, that you look forward to, that you're excited about. If it is a source of shame, then yeah, absolutely not. But what I had just showed, right? I guess I can show it again. This is this year for me. I started January 1st, but when I had first started on the journey, there was maybe a couple my first month. And it was like that was hard to look at, that it's like, oh my God, I only have a couple in there. But it wasn't zero, so it's
Right.
like, even if it was only one, like that was one, you know.
Yes.
So,
Celebrate the small wins. I love that.
exactly. And just long term, especially as you're going through it, you're able to look back and see all the progress, because it's not like, sometimes when you're like working out or training for something, like you can physically see the changes or the differences. Some people notice amazing differences when they stop drinking or slow down a lot, but not everyone does. And a lot of people, it takes a much longer time to feel those changes and differences. So instead of just getting very demotivated and just wanting to say, screw
Mhm.
it, like this can help with the day to day type thing. So at least
Yeah.
what I found.
Yeah. And I noticed too, I don't know if you journal at all. I think you do. We've talked about it in the past, but I tend to I haven't been doing it so much recently. Like I feel like I have that tendency, like a lot of people do, where you journal when you're feeling negative. You have your negative feelings, like whether you're frustrated or angry or sad or whatever, because it does help getting those emotions out and down onto paper. But I think sometimes I just like flip through my old journals just to see, like what I wrote or what had been going on. And it's a very reflective and also helpful
Mhm.
practice for me, because then if you're feeling a certain kind of way one day, you can look back a few years and say, wow, like this was how I was feeling at that time. And I really have changed and grown. And I feel like in the past, I would always journal that anxiety, you know, because it just,
Oh,
in
yeah.
a way, it was helpful getting it out. But also, I'd read those and it's not like cringy. It's more than anything. I was just like, oh, wow, like that was really a hard time for me. And it was
Mm.
almost like a record on repeat, like a broken record on repeat. It was like the same entries, but just different days. And honestly, like I would say I haven't had a journal entry like that in a couple of years now. So that's a cool win. And that's also like really nice to see. So
Yeah, I actually, on a coaching call earlier this week, someone had said the exact same thing, that they found their journal that they were doing like before they had started ShameOver and everything. And literally just this past week found it and was reading it and was like, I know that I've grown a lot, but I did not know how much until being able to see that. So that's
oh,
so
that's awesome. I'm
unbelievably
happy for
powerful.
them. That's
Yeah.
great.
And side note, so I know you'll appreciate this. I got a reading done yesterday, and they had actually brought up writing. And it was the third time now that it's been brought up to me that I need to be writing. So I
Wow.
some, but clearly I need to keep doing it,
That's
because I'm
awesome. And
not.
you're a good writer. I enjoy reading all your posts, so keep it up.
Thanks, appreciate that. So I know you said like early on when I first approached you, like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Would you have any interest? What what were your thoughts and why did you decide to say yes?
I think I decided to say yes for a few reasons. One, I really like to support my friends and their endeavors, so I think that was a big motivator for me. And also, like, I wanted a change for myself. I knew I needed a change to get like really real, like back even before COVID times. There was a point in my life where, yeah, it was like, you're trying to be perfect, do all the things. Like I was working out a ton. I was, like eating healthy. I just, like had all of these things that I was trying to do. And that's, I'd say, when like my relationship with alcohol was probably like at its worst, because I was really trying to minimize what I drank, really not minimize what I drank, but like keep a running tab on it and everything. And then, of course, like you sort of limit yourself, sometimes that leads to you pushing back. And I just remember I had this one night where it was like busy day at work. It was around the holidays, like busy day at work, took a pretty intense workout class, then was going to a friend's birthday party, like ate a tiny little salad, and then drank a couple vodka sodas that night and just like woke up the next morning feeling terrible, but also just like anxiety to a point that I hadn't felt in a long time or at that level. And like really to the point where, you're like knowing that maybe this is problematic, but like you're scared to admit it. So I remember finding a therapist that I reached out to schedule some time with her and going to talk to her about it, because I knew I wasn't an alcoholic, but I knew I definitely had like not a healthy relationship with drinking. And so I remember going to her and talking to her because she's specialized in, working with people with substance abuse issues and stuff like that. And just even, I truly, like, if I'm being brutally honest here, I just like went there to that first meeting because I basically was like, I want someone to tell me that I don't have a problem or I'm not an alcoholic. And that's like truly what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And I did sort of get that answer. But she said, she's like, it sounds like you're not an alcoholic, but you probably have alcohol use disorder. She's like, and more than anything, it seems like you have a lot of anxiety, like, and she's like, and typically when people have a lot of anxiety, they find something to use as a crutch. And so through like working with her, I learned that, yeah, like so many people use alcohol to quote unquote take the edge off. And even if you're not an alcoholic, there is a thing called alcohol use disorder. It's kind of like a large term. And again, people watching this podcast, like, consult a medical professional. Don't just listen to me.
We are not medical advice. Do not
Um,
hold us liable.
but I mean, essentially, like alcohol use disorder could be any number of things, but like I'm pretty sure technically binge drinking falls into that as a category. And so I think it was just finally addressing that and talking to someone who was a bit of a professional, that it was helpful to like understand, hey, there's this thing, alcohol use disorder. And then also, like, if you have a lot of anxiety, people with anxiety and very high standards for themselves tend to find that and use that because you almost feel like it relaxes you. But as I think you've said before, or you can read online, alcohol is a depressant masquerading as a relaxant. So at that point, I had sort of addressed that. And I'd say that was around maybe like 2017, end of 2017, 2018. And then like of trying to get better about that. But evolving into COVID times, I think my relationship got a little bit better prior to your course, just because I was no longer like going out, if you're indulging in a drink or two, you're drinking at home. And that, I think in the past, I probably did have a little bit of social anxiety, especially when it came to going out with coworkers, because I think that's just like a default thing. It's like, instead of, you're like, oh, like happy hour after work. These are people who you know and work with, but they aren't exactly your friends. So it's like maybe there's a level of comfort that you don't really have there. So maybe you have more drinks than you plan to, especially if you're in an industry that is a heavy drinking industry. And I know there are many of those. But then even during COVID times, it kind of was like shifted to like not going out, doing it in the comfort of my own home. At certain times, definitely drinking more in moderation. But I think we were also stressed out that first year of COVID, and my husband and I spent a lot of time building a nice little backyard, set up and porch and everything. And then it was like, it's like what you said in the past or on one of your previous podcast episodes, even if you just have like one drink to end the night, it's like before long, you're like, oh, well, like when was the last time I like didn't have a drink, or even just, I realized it was almost like this little thing inside my head. Is like, it's like this first year of COVID is like summer vacation. And like, once we get over this, then I'll revisit this to get a little healthier. It's almost like that indulgence of like, oh, well, I'm at home and I'm not doing anything. So like, let's have a little nightcap outside. So in a way, I'd say that my relationship with drinking did get a little healthier during COVID times, but I still wasn't being that intentional about it. And I'd say once your program started in the spring of 2021, that was really when I learned how to look into what I wanted my relationship to be with alcohol. And really that's when it got healthier. 100%. That's when it got healthier.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring up, I mean, I've been very open that I've struggled with anxiety and depression, and exactly like you said, like we use alcohol to make us feel better in the moment, but it actually makes both anxiety and depression worse. Since COVID, having, like everything back to normal, and I have been so much more like overstimulated going to events or, just like being around a lot of people. And I don't know if it's because we had that, year and a half, or like we basically were around no one, or, without like distancing ourselves, or if I just always probably had that, but I typically would have drinks at social events. So it, like that just took the edge off it, as we've said. So it's definitely been very interesting now seeing everything from like a completely different lens. And it's like, wow, did I always have this social anxiety? I just didn't know, because I've always been labeled an extrovert. So
yeah,
this is just supposed to come natural to me. So.
And it's interesting too. I think, I also did want to touch on this because it's just fascinating to me. I'm an American. I'm married to a Frenchman, and I feel like our two countries have very different relationships with alcohol in general. And this is, like I said, also a generalization. There are people in any and every country all over the world who struggle in their relationship with alcohol. Disclaimer there. But American culture, I think we're just a competitive, individualistic culture by nature. And in French culture, there's a difference. I think that there's an appreciation for the finer things in life. Almost like if you're eating an amazing meal, you want amazing wine to go with that. And hopefully you're doing that in moderation. And I sort of took certain people, French people who I knew, their relationship with alcohol, which is drink in moderation for pleasure and enjoyment, have it be a part of your life that just almost like enhances your meals, your time with people. I almost like took that as a little bit of an inspiration and a goal, because here in the US, I think so much of it's almost, like we're very big on happy hour. We're like so much advertisements are fed to us. Like, if you want to be beautiful and successful and fun, like drink this vodka. But just also too, it's like, even when you do decide to drink less, like I think I've heard people say it's just like easier to be in France. Take that, whatever you will, whatever that means. But here it's like almost like if you're doing something in America, it's like you have to if you're doing something or not doing something, it's almost like people are like, well, why are you doing that? It's like almost like you have to explain yourself. And
Yes.
really, your relationship with alcohol is no one's business but your own. And you've been really good about reinforcing that in all of your material and program. I mean, obviously, like if you have a supportive partner and family, it's great to have them involved, which I'm thankful I do. But, you know, it almost feels like a competition. You know, there are a lot of people online now who are influencers who might be, like not drinking at all. And the whole point is you can choose not to drink. You can choose to start drinking again, and no one should make you feel bad for that. I'm not saying if you're an alcoholic, like go back to drinking, because I truly think that was unhealthy for you. But, here we just have so many judgments that we place on ourselves and on other people. And I think we just don't have that like fluidity and flexibility that I think would actually make it a lot healthier for us. So
Oh,
I don't know if that made sense or if other people feel that way, but I think if you have, the privilege of being able to travel, you've probably experienced other cultures, and you might take things that you've learned from them and bring them into your own life that make you feel healthier and better.
oh, I could not agree more. What's the legal drinking age in France, or is there not even one?
16. Yeah, so it's 16 years old. And
Okay.
I also do think that I think in general, everyone across the world would benefit greatly from it's a cultural thing too, like
Oh,
we
yeah.
don't learn much about alcohol and how to have a healthy relationship with it. And not saying that everyone in France has that conversation or knows that conversation, but I think it's not just a let's go and get wasted. There's, like I said, that pairing it with food or having in France, there's this thing called like apéro. So it's like their version of happy hour, but it's like maybe if you live in Paris, like since Paris apartments are small, you meet with all of your friends on a
Mhm.
terrace at a patio and you have a drink or two before going home for dinner, you have some snacks. Like drinking there is usually paired with food. And a lot of cool things about apéro is it's like low alcohol by volume. You're drinking a spritz, maybe you're drinking a non-alcoholic drink, or maybe you're having a beer. It's just the pace of life there, I think, is focused on pleasure and enjoyment. Like the
Oh, yeah.
French word, like avec plaisir, it's this phrase that people are always saying. And I think the fact that they're not scared, like the phrase guilty pleasure does not exist in France. They're like, if I want to eat something, I'm going to eat something. Like if I want to drink something, I'm going to drink something. Like here in America, we like think of it all, like we use the phrase guilty pleasure all of the time.
Oh, yeah.
And I think maybe that's just from our historical backgrounds and upbringings. So I think you just have to really make a decision for yourself on who you are and how you want your relationship with drinking or not with drinking to be, and really just own it, because then that's going to allow you to be successful in how you move forward.
Exactly. I studied abroad in Spain, and very similar, like just the whole culture and lifestyle and mentality. And I mean, Spaniards definitely drink, but everywhere I traveled throughout Spain and Europe, it was the Americans getting hammered. Like
Getting
but
wasted.
yeah, it makes no sense. Like we're not allowed to drink legally here till 21, which means your senior year of college. So like that makes zero sense. So what are we doing? We're sneaking it, experimenting in high school.
Right.
Then you go to college and it's complete binge drinking environment. So you cannot learn how to moderate when you're sneaking it and using it to literally get drunk. Like, no one's hanging
Yeah.
out party just like sipping a nice glass of wine.
And I think too, what's great about your program, and like I'm sure you've inspired others, or maybe maybe we were already heading to a cultural shift sort of things, but and just yeah, educating yourself about it a little more, which I think is really important. I think if people have the tools that are easily accessible, I think we can definitely learn more about, you know, alcohol in general, what is a proper serving, and just also not to be not to be a negative Nelly, but you read these headlines that are very sort of they're meant to be attention grabbing, but also just like fully understanding like yes, like women more than one drink a day is not healthy, like by medical standards. But instead of like feeling guilty about that, just like thinking on that and just saying like, okay, like this is important information to have, and how can I make better decisions for myself? Like it's interesting too to me because we are totally like, we know we're like hard drugs are bad. Don't do heroin, don't do meth, like we across the board are like bad idea. But
Mm.
with alcohol, I think alcohol for a very long time has kind of been one of those things like, oh, but whatevs, like it's almost like we're afraid to take, as a culture in general, I think we're afraid to take a good hard look at our relationship with it
100%.
because it is something that, uh, here, I said I didn't want to get long-winded, but I'm getting long-winded. But my point is, we've, as a cultures, I think we've made the person feel guilty. Like we touched on earlier, it's like the issue is with you. You lack willpower, you lack discipline, you lack control. And it's really like addiction or alcohol use disorder is, it's not the fault of the individual, it's really, it's not your fault. So if you're struggling with that, like don't berate yourself, don't feel guilty about it. Like there are ways you can improve your relationship with alcohol and you can get better, but it's just, yeah, I think there's so many times it's easier to say, take the blame and deal with it
Yeah.
than to culturally change and to like systemically change.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's just way too much money in it because if you look at cigarettes and alcohol essentially are not that much different for the health effects that they have long term. Now every label of cigarettes, we know what that looks like. It killed the cigarette market. Granted, they're still making billions, but people associate negative feelings with cigarettes. They could
Yeah.
do the same thing with alcohol. There's no way in hell that they will because of the money. But I even had this conversation with my mom, like kind of telling her some of the stuff. She's like, no, alcohol doesn't do that. I'm like, it does. She's like, no, it doesn't. They would say it if it did. I'm like, no, that's the thing. Like, alcohol is a poison. Like, yeah, I still enjoy it. Like, yesterday had a lovely margarita that I enjoyed every single sip of, but at the end of the day, it's a poison. Like, we have to understand we are basically essentially putting gasoline into our body. Like, you don't go to the gas station and drink that. So, like, why do we think that a different form of it is not going to do stuff to our body negatively, especially long term with
Yeah.
substantial use?
And there are, so many different studies and, maybe one comes out saying like, oh, a glass of red wine a day is good for you. And then another one comes out and says, oh, no, it's not. So I think, people, there's conflicting information, which can be
Oh,
confusing. And then there's also that like, we're humans, we go towards confirmation bias. So if you see a study that you're like, oh, well, this study says it's good for me. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to lean into it. It's just, yeah, it's fascinating. I'm sure a psychologist could go into the reason why
oh yeah.
it's so hard for us maybe to address, our relationships with it. I myself don't have the answer, but I think it's just like anything that we do, just start asking yourself those questions and be kind and generous to yourself. And if you don't like the answers, be like, why is that? Like with as little judgment toward yourself as possible, because I think a lot of times the answer is there, you just might not want to admit it or know it. But also I think Chelsea Handler has this great quote and she's like, as soon as I stopped being so hard on myself, it was easier for me to stop being hard on others. And I think that's actually so brilliant and it's so true. A lot of the things that bother us about other people are actually like what we've internalized about ourselves. So I think that's like an important thing to be mindful of too.
Yes. Our others are the best mirror reflection of ourselves and what we don't like about ourselves or what we've suppressed or what we've worked so hard on that's there's so much there. I'm so glad you brought that up. And just the whole shame thing because I love being here. I love being in America. Don't get me wrong on that. But I feel like American culture is based on shame more than anything. Like it's either you're the most successful or you're not. Like
Yeah.
there's just, and granted, I do not believe every kid should get a ribbon. I'm not saying that, but
But
you had talked about like just the competitive nature and it's like if you're not first, you're last. And I don't know, I don't think that that's the healthiest mindset, obviously by any means. And that just understanding this about ourselves and like you said, just getting curious about it And okay, if I don't like that, why is that? Why is that triggering
Yeah.
such like strong emotions in me? There's something there.
And I was thinking about it too. There's a different podcast that I wanted to mention. I've told you about it before, but there's this really lovely podcast called Ladies We Need to Talk. It's actually run by an Australian gal, and Australia is also another like historically like heavy drinking, hard drinking
Yep.
culture. And I think she herself touched on the topic a little bit, but I actually discovered a different Australian podcast through hers. And this one was run by two women, and they were talking about like anxiety, I think was what the episode was, but
Okay.
also too like how this is kind of just because one of the quotes that they talked about just like stuck out with me so much. And it was, the worst thing that one of the worst things that a woman could be described as is sloppy. And, it is just so, like I used to even think too, I'd be like, oh, well, my friend so and so is like so in control and proper and doesn't drink at all or barely drink. Like, why can't I just be more like her? And it's like, she's her own person. I'm her own person. I support her in her choices. She supports me in my choices. Like she never was like making me feel guilty, saying anything, making any comments. It was like just this like weird pressure that
Yep.
I had like put on myself when comparing myself to other people. And I think, like us women, like to be fair, it's like we are judged more. It's like, oh, if a guy has like a few drinks and like yucks it up or does something a little crazy, it's like, well, whatever, boys will be boys or men will be men, but
Yeah.
the judgment and like misogyny against women I think is so real still that just fuels the fire even more,
Mhm.
and I think it probably affects us and how we, view ourselves and our relationship with alcohol. And it's easier to just give a men a pass, and like I don't want a bunch of like angry trolls to come and start like finding my address or like sending me hateful DMs on Instagram, but I'm like it's
I mean,
real,
it's the world we live in, and
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because there are definitely a lot of women that I've worked with that are successful, in their own right, regardless of what they do or what profession they're in. But it can be very hard because, sales or medical or any of these things, there's a lot of whining and dining or entertaining or events and you are like expected in a sense to not only drink, but to keep up. But it's like, again, women can't handle near as much as men. We know that women can get themselves into unsafe situations very quickly because of that. But then that gets turned on, well, it's your fault. Like, so it's just
Yeah.
like, there's so much there that to your earlier point, it shouldn't matter. Like your relationship is your relationship. Mine is mine. If I'm not drinking, don't ask why. It's not your business, and just like I'm not going to ask you. So I think that's for me, one of the biggest things that has really come out of this is understanding that we are all on this journey together, but at a different point in the journey, all of our paths look very different, but it's so personal and what it looks like for each of us is different. Just respect that. And we don't have to
Yeah.
question, well, why are you doing that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I will say too, like just even within the last year, I've noticed that I feel like a lot of restaurants and bars do offer so many more options of non-alcoholic drinks, whether you want to call them zero proof or mocktails or whatnot. And I've found that's really cool. Like one of the things that has been helpful for me this past year too is if I'm going out, well, like I'm like repeating all of Erica's amazing knowledge, like know your why. Also, a huge thing that you're big about is like have a game plan. So it's like you're like, okay, I'm gonna have one drink tonight, I'm gonna have two drinks tonight. You know that you have a goal set up in your mind, you stick to it, and then you're like, I'm gonna drink water, NA options in between that. So just having that game plan is so helpful. And then for me too, if I'm going out to dinner with friends, typically what I do now is start out with a mocktail because there are so many good options, like amazing
game
zero proof
changer.
options,
Yes.
and start with that and then have your glass of wine with dinner and then you're like one and done, you feel good, or like maybe you just have like a couple of mocktails. And just recently too, there are more people in my life who are, like drinking in moderation or who have cut out drinking almost entirely. And so it's really nice to like go out and have options with them and I think maybe a little cultural shift is happening, more intentionality and mindfulness behind it. So I think that is really cool. I think we're definitely seeing that more than we used to. So I think that's fun and great. And then also too, I've honestly never felt uncomfortable just ordering a non-alcoholic beverage, but I know some people in situations don't
Really?
want questions for whatever reason, but it's kind of fun now too because all of the zero proof drinks look like cocktails too, for better or for worse. So, but I think that's kind of fun, like
Oh, yeah.
you don't just want to drink tap water if you're
Yeah.
doing something
Or a
celebratory
Shirley
and festive.
Temple.
It's nice to feel included in the mix and fancy. So,
Yes. Yeah, we're both in Denver, and Denver has really, really done a great job, bars and restaurants wise, by offering more options than just soda water or a Shirley Temple. So, I mean, even breweries, we have so many breweries where they brew their own stuff that are, if they don't brew their own non-alcoholic option, they're bringing some in. So there's at
mhm,
least an option there. I mean, the biggest thing I remind people there is it's business. They don't care as long as they're making money. They're going to make money off
true.
of you if you get a booze-free option as opposed to getting a soda water. So if you're asking for it, if they don't have it, they will start bringing it in if people are asking. So number one takeaway, if nothing else, ask for it because they will start bringing it in if they don't already have it.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. I didn't think of it that way, but you are totally right.
Well, before we say goodbye, is there anything that has really, like looking back, that has really been like an aha for you or a game changer for you? Or it, I guess if you could sum up your experience or something in one word or sentence, or what would you want to say?
Ah, that's a good question. That's hard. I'm like definitely like a word or sentence. I thought I would touch on this too, just like in the effort of like full disclosure and being totally open and honest, because that was how I wanted to approach this conversation too. Like I'd say I'm 39 now, so I think with the older you get and with more life experience you have, it's easier to like figure out who you are and love yourself and accept yourself, but also like
Mm,
going to therapy has like totally helped me in that way. And not just even talk therapy, like EMDR. It's this cool therapy that if you have stuff that's like lingering from your past or still bothering you, it's a way to like safely address that with a professional. And so it's like EMDR. I always mess up the acronym. It's like I'm movement desensitization, like I don't know. Like, sorry, people, like
yes.
EMDR, just like
EMDR. You
Google
look up
it.
EMDR and it will come up.
But I honestly think, like once you do some like really honest therapy and you sort of maybe get over some past humps and things like that, it is so easier to just be your authentic self and to truly like love and respect yourself. And with that, I think comes all of these like positive changes in your life where you probably are going to drink less. Like you don't care, like you truly don't care what other people think about you, not in a bad way where you're like dismissive or flippant towards them, but you can just be your true authentic self, and like other people's judgments, opinions, like won't matter. I mean, like I'd honestly say that like this past coming up on like a year now is like when I really feel like I've hit my stride in that. And so I think like it's all wrapped up. Everything's like all wrapped up, and like you can't compartmentalize one part of your life and work on that and just like try and focus on that. Like the change is going to be like whole. So I just really think that if you're like looking to make a change, just be a little courageous and be kind to yourself. And it's like that saying, it's like we're always so good at like giving advice to our friends or telling them to take it easy on themselves or treat themselves gently and with kindness, but it's so hard to take that advice for yourself. But like
Okay.
really truly, like if you're going on any sort of like journey or self-improvement journey or whatever, yeah, I think it's really just doing the work to like accept and love yourself, and then everything sort of falls into place after that.
Yes. I'm so happy that you found that for yourself, and most of all, just that self-love and acceptance, because I didn't realize how little I had, because I was always a confident person. You can have all the confidence in the world. That does not mean that you have self-love,
Right.
self-acceptance, self-worth. And so just that once you start having that relationship with yourself, everything else changes.
Yes, 100%, totally. And I would say too, like you've created a really awesome community of people, like-minded people, supportive people. So for anyone who's like interested in like dipping their toe in, I highly totally recommend it. It definitely has like changed my life in certain ways for the better, which is amazing and awesome. And I really do think even like people are spread out. We're all spread out. We're all across the US, but even those little weekly check-ins help. The app helps. You really like, I think sometimes people feel like they have to do it alone, and like you don't have to do it alone. There are a lot of people who want to do the same thing. And even if you never meet them face to face, they're going to be supportive of you and they're going to be there for you. So that's my little plug
Yes.
for you.
And just like you said, like you have to be courageous. And that is the hardest thing. Like, yeah, this is not AA. It is the farthest thing from AA. But the one thing I do agree with AA is like the first step is not, for me, it's not admitting that you have a problem, but admitting that you do need to do something about this,
Yeah,
because I know
totally.
just based on what you said and our conversations outside of this, like I was never a problem drinker in a sense that, like wasn't impacting my relationships or, anything along those lines. But I knew if I didn't change my behavior, it eventually would. And I didn't, like, why wait till you hit rock bottom? What is rock bottom? Why do you even want that to be the case before you do
Yeah.
something? So
Yeah, and I think too, like actually maybe I do have like one last thing to say. Instead of like I think my approach to wanting to change my relationship with alcohol used to be like fear driven and fear based. And going through your program totally changed that. It made it coming from a place of positivity. So that I think is key, like getting rid of the fear and the shame and moving forward with like a little bit of acceptance and more so just like an interest to improve.
yeah, because you realize that you do want what's best for yourself.
Totally. Yes.
We always, tell our best friend, like build them up so much, but we don't do the same thing for us. That's why I always remind us, BYOB, be your own bestie, because
Yes.
if we do have that relationship with ourselves, it makes it so much easier. And when we do have those step backs or, bad moments we're human, it's a lot easier to get right back on track.
Yeah. Yes. And I wanted to say thank you again so much for having me on. I feel like hopefully
Thank
whoever
you.
watches this or listens to it does take some helpful nuggets out of it. And I think it's just really cool what you're doing and how honestly you're doing it. So I hope that someone somewhere gets some value out of it.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for being here, for being just such a dear friend, and for being my first guest. Yay, that's exciting. You've been on a
Yay!
podcast now.
I love it.
To leave, I'm depending on how this works, we'll see, but I might create a playlist of ShameOver songs. So, do you have one song that is like your go-to jam, your power song, your whatever, whether you dance it out, scream it out, cry it out, whatever? Do you have a go-to song?
Oh yeah, you prompted this question before so I could think about it. Totally. I love Janelle Monáe. I just think she's amazing and incredible and she's such like a wonderful advocate for everyone and she's just like unapologetically herself. So she's one of my favorite artists. She's amazing. And her most recent album, the song Float, she's got
Okay.
some people guesting on that. The Age of Pleasure is the album. The whole album is just like it's a banger, Erica. Like not safe for
I've
work.
never heard it.
Like definitely some risque lyrics.
Oh.
But Float is just about like it's totally about embracing your authentic self. And I think that's like an anthem that everybody can get behind. So have a listen.
Love it. I'm gonna go make a playlist and that will be the first song on it. So thank you.
Heck yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so
Awesome.
much
Well,
for being
thank you
here.
again so much for having me today. This was
Yes.
super fun and really cool. So I appreciate you.
Awesome. Right back at you, babe. Thank you for watching, for listening, and hopefully you follow us for more information on drinking less, living more, and just loving yourself. So until next time, cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.